Good morning, good afternoon, and a warm welcome to all of you joining us today for this special event marking 1 year of our ForGEDI massive open online course. I am Todora Rogelja, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's webinar. It is hosted by the University of Padova and organized by the ForGEDI IUFRO Task Force in collaboration with Nordic Forest Research and International Forestry Students Association. First, a sincere thank you to our keynote speaker and panelists for being here with us, and to all of you, our attendees, who are making time to be part of this important conversation. Let me begin briefly by introducing International Union of Forest Research Organizations. IUFRO is a global network that brings together forest scientists, institutions, and stakeholders to advance forest research and promote science-based solutions for sustainable forest management. With over 15,000 scientists from around the world, IUFRO fosters international collaboration to address the world's most pressing environmental and social challenges, including those related to equity and inclusion. I am very proud to announce today our newly formed ForGEDI IUFRO Task Force, which was established to advance gender equity, diversity, and inclusion in forestry-related sectors by building on the success of the ForGEDI MOOC and expanding its reach and impact. Our ForGEDI course was developed under the former IUFRO Task Force on Gender Equality in Forestry in collaboration with 30 organizations from around the world. For 2 years, 42 persons worked together and designed the course to bridge gaps in traditional forestry education. Due to the support of SLU Global and Forest Stewardship Council, the course was launched on April 8 previous year. So we are proud that so far, ForGEDI MOOC has reached 1,900 learners across the globe with an exceptionally low dropout rate of only 2.7%. This shows a strong demand for more inclusive, accessible, and reflective educational content. Content that acknowledges the diverse realities shaping our forests and those who study, depend, and care for them. I am very happy to announce that we obtained, due to our sponsors, Nordic Research Council, also funding for 1 year of full open access. So I warmly invite you to enroll to the course if you didn't have the opportunity to do so yet. So the topic of our webinar today is growing gender equity, diversity, and inclusion through forestry education, overcoming challenges and making an impact. We invite you to think critically about how education can serve not only as a tool for learning, but also as a space for resistance, transformation, and empowerment. At a time when the world is facing ecological uncertainty, social injustice, and growing inequalities, GEDI is not a luxury, it is a necessity. And as Nelson Mandela said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. So we will hear today from educators, researchers who are making an impact and challenging traditional norms and imagining new ways of teaching and learning that center inclusion and equity. So before we start with our keynote speech and a panel discussion, I would like to share a few technical notes with you. First of all, there are 2 sessions of this webinar. One is now, and the other will happen in the afternoon, according to Central European summertime. They are being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel. After the keynote speech, we will dive into panel discussion with 3 of our panelists. We will do our best to save time for your questions and answers. So please feel free to submit your questions in a Q&A dedicated space. You will see the icon as a call out with a question mark at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So you can put your question there at any time during the session. Our colleagues, Georgia Botaro, Philip Chambers, and Ratia Lipe will support us in collecting your question and forwarding that to us. Thank you, Georgia, Philip, and Ratia for your support today. At the end of the webinar, we would also like to ask you to complete a very short feedback survey so we can improve for the future. And finally, if you have any technical issues, please let us know in the chat and our colleagues will do our best to support you. So once again, welcome. And I would like maybe to start with a short presentation from our keynote speaker, Vivian Mack. Welcome, Vivian. Vivian studied international forest ecosystem management at the University of Sustainable Development in Eberswalde. In her thesis, she focused at the experience of gender discrimination that forestry students faced in their studies. She is head of IFSA Gender Subcommission, and she was also the first ForGEDI MOOC learner. So welcome, Vivian. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Are you ready that we start your presentation?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to speak today on behalf of the IFSA Gender Subcommission. I'm ready.
Vivian. Okay, Vivian, please.
Okay. So I will be sharing our journey around the open letter on gender and forest education, the actions taken through workshops and initiatives, and reflect on the impact we've seen so far, both the encouraging responses and the challenges still ahead. So furthermore, I will give an insight into my bachelor thesis where I conducted a study on students' experiences of gender-related discrimination and gender diversity in their studies. First, IFSA is International Forest Student Association, and we are the largest network of forest students worldwide. So we are entirely run by students and completely on volunteer based. And we also have 141 local committees, which are split in 64 different countries. So we enrich our members in education through international events, networking, and intercultural exchanges. Yes, now my presentation. So I am a white, Central European, able-bodied cis woman. So where I come from and who I am shapes the way I see and experience the world. And that's exactly why I don't want to speak only from my perspective today. Instead, I'm here to share a variety of voices from across the global IFSA network. Through our work in the Gender Subcommission, we've been reaching out to students from all over the world to learn from one another and to expand our collective understanding. So today, I also want to bring those voices into the room with us. In 2021, an open letter was published by two of the members, by Teresa Klaraloch and Barbara Oehler. It was titled Gender and Forest Education and called for more gender equality and for learning spaces that are conscious and inclusive of different identities. So the response was overwhelming, and that's when we decided to organize workshops. The goal was simple: to create an open space for conversations, to better understand the experiences students are having worldwide, and to reflect on how these experiences can guide our work in the Gender Subcommission. Today, I would like to share some insights from two of these workshops. We asked open questions, intentionally leaving space for honesty, for nuances, for storytelling. What we received was very powerful. So we didn't just hear about pain and frustration. We also heard about resilience, about support, about students' vision for a better and more equitable future in forestry. Across all regions, three key themes kept coming up. So patterns begin to emerge, clear, consistent, and powerful. And perhaps most importantly, many students said that for the first time, they didn't feel alone. So that being in a space where these topics were spoken out loud, where people listened, believed, and understood was deeply empowering. So what are our experiences with gender-related discrimination in forest education? First, let's start with the educational environment. Many students find themselves in male-dominated spaces, whether it's the classroom, the lab, or the images we see in forestry promotion materials. So these environments can feel unwelcoming, even intimidating. We heard stories of sexist jokes being brushed off as normal, or an unspoken pressure to adapt, to laugh along, to blend in, to not make a fuss. And in some cases, students, particularly FINTA students like female, inter, non-binary, and trans and asexual students, experience sexual harassment that limits their opportunities. So I brought this quote, I will read it out. I couldn't practice chainsaw class because the male instructor felt that girls are slow in learning, and sometimes they overreact, which will put the class in danger. To follow up, there are also physical and mental barriers people told us about, things we often don't talk about enough, like from the challenges of dealing with menstruation in remote field conditions to something as basic as a lack of appropriate facilities. And beyond the physical, there's also the mental weight of self-doubt, like this fear of not sounding smart enough holds many students back from participating in discussions, even when they have something important to contribute. Also, in early stages of career, these challenges don't magically disappear. So we heard from young professionals whose ideas were dismissed or ignored, whose proposals weren't taken seriously, and they knew deep down that gender was the reason. When I further on want to talk about my thesis. In my bachelor thesis, which had the title The Dynamics of Gender Relations and Sexism in Forestry Studies, and a study among students at the HNAA and their experiences, I explored how sexism and gender diversity are experienced within the study programs Forestry and International Forest Ecosystem Management, which I have studied from the Eberswalde University for Sustainable Development, the HNAA. So to do this, I conducted both a quantitative and a qualitative survey in 2024. The results offer a current snapshot of the situation at the university, and most participants reported that they had not experienced gender-based discrimination, which is encouraging. However, a minority did share such experiences, and these were primarily reported by FINTA individuals. So we are seeing encouraging shifts in how women are represented and perceived in the forestry sector. But studies have shown that the image of women as an exception in this field is starting to break up. So, but at present, actually, IFM is the only forestry program in Germany, the one that I studied, where there's a 50% of women's quota, the only one. And in fact, the gender balance in this specific program shows that more women are finding their place in forestry-related work. Even in the more traditional forestry program at my university, the number of women is rising yearly and yearly. And many reported feeling that they're feeling comfortable, represented, recognizing the shift from a male-dominated field toward a more open and inclusive profession. So the overall mood I grasped is cautiously optimistic. When we talk about the social and the academic dynamics, people have reported to me. I have asked students, for example, whether gender balance in their study program had an impact on their learning experiences. And interestingly, around 50% of all groups answered no, so it did not have an impact. But several reports have been made of homosocial behavior and patriarchal behavior. So meanwhile, many FINTA students felt that they had to prove themselves more than men to be taken seriously also. When we talk about the academic dynamics, it was that more than half of the respondents said that gender awareness and teaching language was only partly considered. Similarly, feedback on the use of non-stereotypical gender images and gender diverse literature was also mixed. So still reports of stereotypical portrayals and courses of materials persisted. For example, assumptions that women are less strong and less resilient or unfitting for certain tasks. Also, participants highlighted that feminist perspective and the work of female experts in the field were often completely left out. So yeah, another thing is also that people said that in some cases the teaching itself seemed implicitly designed for a male audience. So what could an ideal gender equal forest education look like? So what could we do to move forward? First, education matters. So we need mandatory gender equality education for all forestry students. The second is our curriculum must reflect the world we live in. Let's make sure teaching materials, field trips, and case studies are inclusive, representative of all genders. And also the representation, of course, like we need visible role models, more FINTA lecturers, mentors, and leaders that students can look up to. And also the support structures we need to work on. So people ask for safer spaces where students can speak freely without fear of judgment, and also for mentoring programs so that students have someone they trust that they can turn to. And also having, like, don't forget that like feminist topics often speak most to these who experience discrimination, but that does not mean the other should stay silent. Like, it means we must actively include and engage everyone, especially those with the most power to make a change. So the summary of all of this is the results of these workshops and my survey clearly show that gender-based differences and experiences of discrimination in forest education are still present and must be addressed. So we need more awareness and training. We need more representation of marginalized voices and a safe, inclusive environment. And one thing is absolutely clear after this survey and the workshop. So we cannot ignore the experiences of the minority. They may be statistically small, but they carry a deep meaning, and they signal where work still needs to be done. So I thank you a lot for your attention, and I would like you to invite you get in contact with us. Feel free to share the open letter, and don't forget to listen and talk to students. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivienne. Very interesting presentation. I believe it really provided us with a great overview of the situation in higher forestry education. So if there are any questions for Vivienne, please put them in a Q&A section. Otherwise, I would like to introduce and invite our two panelists who will join Vivienne in the discussion. One of them is Professor Peter Kanowski. Peter is professor of forestry at Australia National University. He is a global leader in forestry and environmental policy with a strong commitment to education and academic leadership. A Rhodes Scholar and former Deputy Director General at CIFOR, he has shaped forestry curricula and supervised generations of students. His teaching and research focus on international forest governance, sustainability, and community engagement, and he is widely recognized for his contributions to both education and public policy. Hello, Peter. Thank you very much for joining us. Another panelist joining our discussion today is Gloria Kukurie-Adeiga. She works as a research scientist at the Forestry Research Institute of Ghana. Gloria is gender and climate researcher with over a decade of experience working at the intersection of agroforestry, restoration, and rural livelihoods. Her work focuses on enhancing food security and reducing climate vulnerability among smallholder farmers in northern Ghana. As a part of our award-winning Regreening Africa project, she has advanced gender-responsive approaches to ecosystem restoration. Gloria also serves as an Omega Resilience Award Africa 2024 Fellow and has consulted international organizations, including USA. Good morning, Gloria. Thank you very much for joining our panel. We would now start with the questions. As you know, we prepared several questions for you. So, Peter, I would maybe like to start with you, as you are a professor and you have immense teaching experience about international forest governance in many countries and contexts, not just Australia. You also authored influential papers about forestry education. So we heard Vivienne's presentation. I am wondering What are some of the most persistent challenges that you've encountered in integrating gender equality, diversity, and inclusion topics in your work in forestry education?
Thank you, Teodora, and hello, everybody. To those who are in the audience, thanks for your cheery messages. We can't respond to them from the panel chat, but nice to see you, so to speak. And Vivian, thanks very much for that very informative overview of your work, which resonated certainly with much of my experience over 45 years of personal involvement in forestry education. Thanks to the organisers, and congratulations to ForGEDI on its first year. So thinking about your question, Teodora, I thought there are really three arenas, the institutional, the individual, and about resources that are, I think, the arenas of persistent challenge. And so I'll talk to each of those briefly in turn, but they're obviously linked. I think at my university, I'm speaking to you from the Australian National University in Canberra. It's a beautiful autumn day outside. We've been fortunate in the Australian university sector over this century and the tail end of the previous one to have what I think of as an enabling and supportive institutional environment. We've had policies and practices at Australian universities that have encouraged and in fact required us to become more attentive to and more supportive of gender equity, diversity, and inclusion. That's not to say that our efforts in that arena are perfect. Of course, they're not. But I think I can see how we've progressed over the course of this century. And, you know, some examples are the establishment at my own university of a vibrant gender institute that brings together academics and students with a commitment to gender equity. It might be analogous to some of the work that the IUFRO Task Force does, for example. We've got a range of policy measures and practical measures to acknowledge and address GEDI issues, things like mentoring, professional development programs, learning opportunities. And I think these flow through into the learning and working environment for our students. And as you rightly identified, Vivian, that's absolutely critical in terms of creating an inclusive learning space and environment. The second point I'd make is around the sort of individual arena. And by this, I mean individuals who are prepared to take the lead in advocating for gender equity, diversity, and inclusion. Not an easy thing to do at the groundbreaking stages of pursuing those goals, and it's always work in progress. But, you know, an example that came to my mind is of my former colleague, Dr. Marlene Bushi. You may know of her through her work internationally. She spent nearly 5 years at ANU in the late 1990s, and she did some foundational work on women in forestry in Australia, the first study of that sort that we'd had in Australia. And that work gave us the basis to address some of the sorts of issues that Vivian identified from her thesis, but also gave our professional association nationally a platform for initiatives to address those issues. So my second point is to compliment everybody, like Marlene, who takes the lead in advocating and working for gender equity, diversity, and inclusion in their sphere of influence. Third point, briefly, something that I think has changed for the better over the last 25 years or so has been the availability of resources to support learning and action in GEDI. I mentioned Marlene's work of 25 years ago. There are many other examples subsequently. There's the work that our students do, like Vivian's honours, but I have a number of students working on gender-related issues with different communities in Australia and the region, and their work is helping, I think, address these issues. And, you know, internationally, we have ForGEDI as one of the more recent examples. So I think that the much greater availability of resources to address gender equity, diversity and inclusion play a key role in catalysing knowledge and understanding and in stimulating ideas and action. And that's an appropriate note for me to acknowledge ForGEDI's anniversary. Thanks, Tadora.
Thank you, Peter. I agree with what you said, and this is very nice perspective on these three pillars that you mentioned: institutional, individual, and resources. So we heard from Vivienne about the situation in education from students' perspective. We heard now, Peter, your perspective from more, let's say, institutional point of view. Gloria, coming back to you, so your research is focused on agroforestry, and we can say it is the intersection of forestry and agriculture. So you work in a practice on improving farmers' livelihoods in Ghana, and you also advise for many prestigious developmental agencies. So we are curious, based on your experience, how does gender equity, diversity and inclusion influence actually farmers' resilience in today's context of changing climate, extreme weather events, and high uncertainty?
Hello, everyone. And thanks for joining our webinar. It's almost 30 degrees where I am, so it's quite hot, just to give you some perspective of the climate in northern Ghana. And I'll start by saying that when I started the research in this field, I quickly understood that the farmers, they understand what their situation is. They know what their opportunities are in the current climate, and they completely understood the challenges. The problem with farmers, I guess, how they interpret and adapt on the landscape is because they have so many challenges coming at them and complexities of land infertility, increasing population, food insecurity, climate variability. So they do what they think would provide the quickest outcome to keep sustaining them. The example is given of men and women across the landscape. We have this traditional rights to land and tree resources, but because of these climate change and complex challenges that they have, these have had to shift over the period. So you find that men are competing for the resources that used to traditionally be for women and pushing women out of land uses that were traditionally theirs. And where GEDI comes in my practice is to show through the interventions and engagements, and I was happy to hear Vivienne talk about the conversations and the visions that provided, the conversations that resulted in not just talking about the problems, but also discussing what the strategies and the visions were for those students. So it's the same thing that we do. We have these engagements, these conversations, so that farmers can themselves understand what the contributions of both men and women and the youth and all the marginalized groups we can identify across the landscape, what their contributions are, one, to household resilience, to the resilience of the landscape. And together they can come up with what strategies they want to use to resolve this. And that comes out from the vision that they all decide. And I work a lot at the household level. Once you can show through these exercises, that are engagements that we do, that women's livelihood actually underpins household food security, we change the dynamic. The men understand that they bring in the staple, they are bringing in the grain, but they know that the women's livelihood, which is mostly coming from tree resources like shea nuts, baobab, mango, that it's underpinning the food security and make sure that the food gap months in the household are reduced. So these are some of the research interventions that I have been involved in, and I think that with GEDI, we can shift these dimensions. And when we look at what that means then for institutions, forestry education, it means that we can then provide the evidence from this can be used to influence how projects look at gender, because we've come from a place where we focus a lot on participation, number of men and women participating in projects. We tick that box for gender. Now we begin to look at what are the contextual issues existing and how can we address that. So bringing that evidence, it's very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. Indeed, this is very nice perspective that this work is bringing evidence that we need to actually change the situation. And this is exactly what we tried with ForGEDI MOOC when we started developing 3 years ago already, actually now. So Vivienne, we heard the background situation based on your thesis and IFSA workshop, and taking other perspective, you were also the first ForGEDI MOOC learner. So I'm curious, what do you see as an added value of the course, and what gaps and challenges actually remain ahead of us with respect to the content we provide?
Thank you, Theodora. Yeah, what really stood out for me was the course connected theory with real world practice, and it highlighted how gender equality, diversity, and inclusion are not just abstract concepts, but fundamentals to how we shape the future of forest landscapes and forest education and forest governance. I think especially values was the global perspective, like the course brought together case studies and voices from all over the world, as this talk is doing today as well, which helped me to understand definitely a lot of how different gender dynamics play out in various forest contexts, and also the empowerment through representation. Like, I really like that, like seeing experts, especially women and people from marginalized backgrounds also, and leading in forestry related fields was powerful for me and very motivating. And of course, yeah, there are some gaps always and challenges. I think one thing it's like not a lot of forestry programs still integrate gender and diversity topics into the curriculum. It's like very rare, I think, and many students still don't encounter these discussions during the studies unless they actively seek them out. Yeah, so also the institutional barriers are there still. Yeah, and I think there is also still like the need for a deeper intersectionality. So the course is still like already touching multiple aspects of identity, but I think there's still more room to better explore how gender intersects with race, with class, with sexuality, with colonial histories and forest contexts, which I think is interesting for us all. So I think overall ForGEDI was a great step forward, and I'm very happy that we keep on going and we're celebrating 1 year. And yeah, but I think it has been a step. So we need to continue the dialogue, more inclusive policies and active efforts from institutions to embed GEDI principles.
Thank you, Vivienne. We are very happy to hear your praise about the course, but we are even more grateful for pointing to some gaps and future steps that we need to make. And indeed, this is our plan with newly formed ForGEDI IUFRO Task Force to continue working on this topic. And you already tackled a bit on the topic and the challenge that not many programs are actually integrating this kind of topics in their curriculum. And that brings me to the second question, which is the same for all three panelists. So free access to high quality education is most basic form of empowerment that society needs to provide. And I would say the society must provide. And education for all is also a stepping stone in the path to global environmental justice. So how can forestry education serve actually as a tool for transformation, resistance, and empowerment in this context of sustainable and inclusive futures that globally we are striving to reach? So maybe I would like to start this time, Gloria, with you to give us your viewpoint on.
Forestry is not a very I stand to be corrected, but in Ghana, when we talk about forestry, it's very top-down, very militarized implementation that does not take into consideration the views of local people. We need to deconstruct that. We need to look at how we shift that ideology, because that I think is a fundamental challenge. And also because forestry has been promoted for the longest time for economic benefits like timber. It didn't take into consideration ecological and social well-being. So education can promote like a holistic approach that integrates this ecological balance, cultural knowledge, and also the economic sustainability of forestry, which I think is the biggest challenge, which is lacking. And through that, we can also showcase and evidence some community-led solutions, because indigenous people, again, I say, they know how to manage these spaces, and because they also have this cultural link to forest and trees, and how traditions and customs always go back to trees. They have evolved a way, they understand the dynamics of forest management, which formal forestry excludes or does not highlight, it doesn't include that in the education. So what we can bring through the inclusive curriculum is also showcasing these successes of community-led approaches that show that men and women can local people particularly can manage their landscapes. We can also empower particularly women and young people by providing them with the leadership and access to decision-making spaces. And I think IFSA through ForGEDI is already achieving that, bringing women, and I think Vivienne also mentioned that, providing also role models to show that, yes, women in these spaces can also contribute and also be involved in forestry as men do. So these are just my few perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. Vivienne, what would be your point? You already said a bit about integrating in curricula, but maybe you wish to elaborate.
Yeah, in general, when I think about like forest education, it teaches us how humans and forests are also interconnected, and that their relationship goes far beyond ecology, and it includes like culture, identity, justice, power. So how can it like serve as a tool for transformation? I would think that it can kind of like that forest education can challenge like dominant narratives, like for example, growth at all costs, and instead promote like more holistic and regenerative approaches. So when education includes diverse ecological knowledge, indigenous perspective, as Gloria already said, and social science, it empowers students to envision and implement new models of stewardship, I think. And also the resistance part is, I think, important, because many parts of the world and forests are sites of struggles, like over land rights, over access, as Gloria already mentioned, also over whose knowledge it seems as valid. And by making space for critical thinking, intersectional analysis, and historical awareness, forestry education can become a site of resistance against greenwashing, against neocolonialism and patriarchal structures. And also, again, empowerment. I think free and inclusive education gives voices to those traditionally left out of decision-making. So when marginalized students, whether it's FINTO students, BIPOC students, indigenous or low-income students, they can access like forestry education, and they not only like gain knowledge, tools and networks, but also the legitimacy to be part of shaping forest future. So like to, especially empower, including the role models, the representation, and the community building spaces, I think. Yep.
Thank you, Vivian. Yes, it builds up very nicely. So what I am hearing is forestry in a very, very broad sense that actually integrates social sciences, intersectionality, legal studies. So we are already moving towards the governance topic. Peter, what would be your perspective? We heard already some thoughts from Gloria and Vivian, but what would be your takeout on this question?
Yeah, perhaps just to add briefly, I mean, if we think about the fundamental purpose of universities, I think about it being to provide spaces to challenge norms, to question, and as Vivian said in her original presentation, to provide a safe space for that to happen. I think that's a fundamental role of universities. It's obviously discomforting for those in who benefit from the status quo, and I think we could see the sort of MAGA opposition to DEI in the USA as a response of the privilege to that discomfort. But I think it's really a fundamental role of universities to provide that space. To pick up on a point Stephen Wyatt's made in the chat, I think there's a lot of common ground in creating those spaces between gender issues and issues of exclusion and disadvantage to others, because what we're really talking about is respecting and appreciating diversity and valuing that as a positive, not as a negative. And I think that is a fundamental common ground between the elements of GEDI. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. Indeed, this is the first step of recognizing, appreciating, and valuing diversity and inclusion and equality. And as you said, we are seeing lately more and more opposition to this matter. So it seems sometimes that we are going backwards instead of forwards, which is a pity after progress that has been made. But maybe to come back to let's say, hopefully more positive note. So we heard what is the situation in forestry education and also in practice. We also heard what are the challenges and how our education can serve as a tool for resistance and make a path to sustainable future. So what practical advice would you have for integrating gender equality, diversity, and inclusion into the everyday work and practice of our audience? Maybe what would you recommend to improve the access to equality of GEDI education in forestry, and how each of us actually can play an active role? And coming back to what Peter also said on the first question, coming to individual part, how each of us can play active role in advancing GEDI within forestry sector, but also broader in our environments. So maybe Vivian, maybe I start from you, as IFSA is also working a lot on those topics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think sounds so cheesy, but like everyone in this room has the power to make a difference, whether you're a student, a researcher, a lecturer, a practitioner. Like every day we decide on things. So I had collected some practical advices for integrating GEDI into your work. So I thought we start like with self-reflection. We had this already today, but ask yourself, whose voices are missing in my classroom, my team, my research? What assumptions do I make without realizing it? Like GEDI, I think work begins with like awareness. And also diversify your sources, like use and cite research from women, from indigenous scholars and thinkers from the global south, and representation in academia matters a lot, I think, and knowledge is richer when it comes from different perspectives. And furthermore, also create a more safe and inclusive space. I think, yeah, it's never safe, but like a more inclusive space. Actually, I like this framing more. So whenever you're leading a group project or teaching a class or hosting a meeting, think about how to include and uplift like quieter voices also, and make room for different experiences. And the last point, I think, is challenge bias when you see it. So this is not always like easy, and it does not always mean to be confrontation. So it can ask also a thoughtful, like that you would ask a thoughtful question or checking in with someone after a meeting if you have recognized something that maybe was not 100%. Like all these small moments of allyship, I think, make a big impact also. Yes.
Thank you, Vivian. This was very, very nicely summarized. Peter, I come back to you. So what would be your practical advice to integrate gender equity, diversity, and inclusion, and what each of us can do? Would you have something to add to what Vivian said?
Certainly endorse what Vivian was saying. Thanks, Vivian. But I guess in my experience, you have to walk the walk yourself, which I think is also partly what Vivian's saying. My experienced students are pretty good at discerning if you're not being genuine. We've got some other language that describes that, but I won't use that here. And so I think yourself being committed to GEDI objectives and providing that space for students to hear from a diversity of voices at the different sort of levels that we might need to address these issues. And you know, that's something that I've found ways to do in my teaching more effectively in the last decade than I think I did previously. And so I think I've found it to be quite feasible and very positive, drawing from my colleagues, drawing from the students that I work with who are themselves committed to these objectives, and also taking advantage of being opportunistic of other events that are happening on campus, on visits to our university. We had Daniela Kleinschmidt, the now president of IUFRO, here on study leave. In 2020, she gave our flagship public lecture about women in forest science and ran a workshop about that topic. We're doing a lot of work with First Australian communities and giving them voice through that work. So I think, as Vivian was suggesting, being thoughtful and purposeful about giving effect to these goals in our day-to-day work is really the core of it. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. So we heard, let's say, a perspective from the student. We heard Peter's perspective, so they are really complementary. So Gloria, what would be your advice as you are the one who is really in the contact with practitioners, with local communities? What advice would you have to integrating gender equity, diversity, and inclusion in everyday work and practice, and what each of us can actually do to make a change?
I think what Vivian and Peter both said are still very relevant, even in practice. But I guess some of the reflections I still have after all the gender work we've done is that it just remains in a silo. We are not able to integrate it throughout the implementation, throughout the whole, all the other aspects, especially when it comes to the technical aspects of implementation. We completely forget about gender and we deal with it as a separate pillar within implementation. So I think it's very important to find or to be conscious again about it, even in the technical implementation. So for instance, you are using GIS to measure forest cover or vegetation cover change over a period of time. You find that that training does not have a gendered component. It doesn't think about the gendered component in that specific case. But as forestry practitioners, agroforestry practitioners, and our students coming up, we need to start thinking about ways to integrate it throughout the whole component of what we do, and not just think about it in a silo, because it's effective there, but when we think about scaling it up and out, that's where we then meet the challenges and we don't know how to deal with that. But that also means that for all the personnel, the staff, and for ourselves, we always need to calibrate our own gender bias. We need to think about how often do you think about gender. Even as researchers, we come with an inbuilt bias because of the experiences that you've had throughout your life. So you need to be conscious of that. You always need to think about that. And I guess I would end by saying that in all the interventions, you have to ask yourself, how do I include, like Vivian and Peter said, how do I make sure that the voices that are absent are represented? How do I strengthen the capacity of men, women, youth, or other marginalized groups to come to the same level so that they can be able to also practice what is being implemented? And that's very crucial, because I see on the field that we just keep gender in a box and then we sprinkle it a bit on the projects when we think that we need to tick the box. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. Yes, it all build up very well. So what I heard from you all is starting with self-reflection and awareness, and first questioning yourself, what can be done and what assumptions do I bring on the table, and then diversifying resources, trying to include those who are not heard, indigenous, traditional, women or other social groups. So taking care also of age, ethnicity, and other characterizers that we usually don't think to. And then actually, doing what we preach. So as Peter said, walk the talk. And this is something that each of us actually, I think, need courage and dedication to deal with this matter. So as Gloria said, we often speak on the topic a lot, but when something needs to be done, we are somehow lacking the energy to go through. So we hope that with ForGEDI MOOC, this is exactly what we wanted to do, to start practicing what we were preaching in the previous task force. So hopefully we will see the change as we will create the change. We are coming closer to end of our webinar. We have some 6-7 minutes left. So I would like to thank you for being with us today and for contributing to this meaningful discussion. I believe that your engagement, as well the engagement and presence of our audience, shows that advancing gender equity, diversity, and inclusion in forestry education is not only necessary, but it's valued across and needed across our global community. So with that said, what we can do all is stay connected. As connected, we are staying stronger. So I invite you to stay connected via our social media. You can always outreach to us if you have any ideas that you need to clarify or that you would like to work with. We are here for you. And at the end, I would like to invite our attendees to take a short survey about the webinar and the course, if you took it, as this is the way how we can collect structured feedback and we can improve in the future. And we have 5 years of work ahead of us. So now is the right moment to actually give us feedback and challenge our work so we can be better. So on behalf, the webinar link will, the survey link will also open when the webinar ends. So if you didn't scan the QR code or went to the link, you will get it after the webinar. So with this, I would like to thank you, Gloria, Vivian, and Peter for joining our webinars today. I thank also Philip, Ratia, Georgia, and Ida for being here and support. And of course, many thanks to all of you who joined to the first session. There will be another session in the afternoon. The time will not be suitable for every region, but with those 2 time slots, we hope that we manage to make the webinar more inclusive for different regions. So I hope to see also some people in the afternoon session. And yes, take care, stay safe, and we see you around. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks all.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.